Christopher Lynn Hilkin.
That is
I
not
actually
it,
don't.
but it's close.
What's your actual middle name? I should know this. Ray.
Ray.
I knew
It's
that.
Ray.
I knew that. Okay, Chris Hilkin, friend of 910. For those of you in 910 that don't know Chris, Chris is one of my best friends in life, coworker at church, incredible dad, incredible husband, mentor of mine, somebody I look up to incredibly as somebody who just loves the Lord with everything they are and loves his church. And I'm stoked to dive into a conversation. We're in week 2 today in worship. And last week we dove into a passage in Exodus 34 where Moses and God are having this conversation on Mount Sinai post the Israelites worshiping this golden calf, and then God coming back and proclaiming his name, the Lord, Yahweh, Yahweh. I am compassionate, I am gracious, I am slow to anger. And really the conversation we were unpacking in the last week was how does it change our worship when God has a name? Right? How does it change the way that we worship this God that sometimes maybe we think is just this outside force or this creator or, and he could have stepped into the conversation with the people of Israel post worshiping the golden calf and proclaimed his omnipotence, his omniscience, his omnipresence. Really, he could have said, these are my attributes, worship me. And yet he chooses to say, like, I'm gonna start with my name. Actually, it's Yahweh, and this beckoning for relationship as he repeats it twice. And this week, really what I want to unpack is before he proclaims his name, Moses asks to see God, and God says, you can't handle seeing me, right? In Exodus 33 at the end, he says, if you see my face, you will die. And then kind of a fun comparison, and you guys in the Jordan are talking about Isaiah chapter 6 right now, and it's been fun being a part of that conversation. And we want to dive a little bit into that concept of Isaiah 6, where he walks into the throne room of God, and Isaiah, being this prophet, falls flat on his face going, woe is me. Like, I shouldn't be here. I can't be in your presence. And there's these angels, and we're going to unpack this story more on Wednesday night. So I'm excited to see students there, but there's these angels called the seraphim with 6 wings, and they're covering their face and they're covering their feet out of just this sign of, even we aren't worthy to be here, and proclaiming, like, you are holy, you're set apart. And yet in the New Testament, in a book called Hebrews chapter 4, there's this verse, such a powerful verse, that we can approach God's throne of grace in confidence. And so maybe you can help unpack this a little bit in just a conversation that I love having with you of how is that the same God that proclaims his name and is compassionate and gracious and slow to anger, and yet Isaiah falls flat on his face. And then all throughout scripture, when we see angels, the first thing they say is, don't be afraid. And then those angels are afraid of God. Proverbs says the beginning of wisdom is fear. And then Hebrews says, approach God's throne in confidence. It seems like there's these contradicting measures when it comes to approaching God's throne. What do you see when you look at scripture on how we can approach God when it comes to worship?
Okay, so this is a super weird analogy. When you were talking, is the first thing that came to my mind. A while back, my wife runs like a homeschooling co-op where a whole bunch of people get together and they do homeschooling stuff or whatever. And there was like a water little, like those little green boxes, you lift them up and there's got little in the ground. They're like little
Yeah.
boxes. Okay, so one of the kids opened up one of those things. There's a massive beehive in there. And so these bees started coming out, stung this kid like 6 or 7 times. Mom froze, didn't know what to do. Ended up being another mom in the co-op, had to go grab her son and bring him out. That mom got stung a bunch. And bees are scary. They're like some scary mothers, like they're terrifying. Like, you ever been in a swarm of bees? It's like, it's the worst. Well, and I don't know why, but like a week later, I'm like, you know what? I want to buy an apiarist suit. So if an apiarist is like those big bee suits that you wear and you can like walk into the bees then. And cause I was like, it'd be kind of cool to like harvest our own honey and, just complete the dream of living off the grid. And so you buy an apiarist suit. And so I'm wearing the bee suit and I'm walking in the middle of the bees. The bees didn't get any less frightening or any less scary. But what I was, and this is the word that's used even in the book of Isaiah chapter 6, atone for, what covered me, that's that word means. What I was covered by, though, was something different. So bees are just as scary. The wrath of God is just as intense. But now because of what Jesus has done, it's not me that changes. It's not God that changes. It's the atonement that has changed. It's the covering that has changed. So now I can come in with confidence. I can walk up to those bees with confidence, knowing that those stings are not for me anymore. That I can righteously see people without that suit and go, I hope you find Jesus, who it says he is our mediator. He is our atonement. He is our covering. And that same word is used like in the stories of like the prodigal son, to come put a robe on him to cover him when he comes home. And so I think the covering is what changes. That's why people go like, well, he changed from the Old Testament to the New Testament. No, Jesus just became our apiary suit. He became our beekeeping suit. So we can approach that kind of fear and that kind of terror in a righteous respect and awe and fear of it. And at the same time, knowing those things aren't for me anymore. So I think that's the best analogy I can come up with when you were talking.
Yeah, that's so cool. I love that. And that was even a fun aspect of this last week was we got to unpack Exodus 34 and take each one of those attributes of God, his compassion, his graciousness, his slowness to anger, and point to the cross and see like where does his compassion play out on the cross, in his empathy and sympathy, that we don't have this, God who sits distantly. We have a God who enters in, like John chapter 1 says, that he becomes flesh, he walks among us, his graciousness, that it is the grace, the gift of the cross, that the Old Testament, even from God's proclamation of his name, just points to this Jesus. And I love that you brought that up of how in the Old Testament, and whether it's Isaiah 6 or Exodus 33 and 34, how do we look forward, read it in its context, but look forward to this hope that we have in Jesus. I was recently reading Screw Tape Letters, which is just such a fascinating book. And we've talked about it a decent amount in 910, but where there's this demon, it's kind of a weird concept, right? There's this demon uncle writing to his demon nephew going, I'm going to train you up on how to distract God followers or how to distract Jesus followers. And one of the things that I want to talk about this week specifically is our posture in worship. Because if the same God is the God of the Old Testament and he's the God of the New Testament, and it's my beekeeper suit of Jesus's right standing with God that I can wear as I walk into the presence of God, how do I maintain appropriate posture and like fear of God? Because something you've taught me actually is that familiarity breeds contempt. That if I'm just around God all the time, or if I'm around worship all the time, the tempting thing can be I can walk into a Wednesday night or whatever it may be, a weekend service pre-COVID or post-COVID, and we can begin to worship God, and I'm not really worshiping the Isaiah 6, Exodus 33 God. I'm worshiping kind of like this whole Jesus is my homeboy movement, where like I'm slouched in my chair, or I'm just like singing words for the sake of singing words, and I don't mentally enter into God's presence like I would like to. And the Screw Tape Letters, the uncle, he says to his nephew, he says, man, do everything you can do to disconnect physical bodily posture from reality for the Christian, for the Christ follower. He says, if you can get them to think that your posture doesn't matter in worship and in prayer, like that's a win for us. And now for the viewer, for context, you have to remember this is a demon uncle writing to a demon nephew going, how do we beat Christians? How do we defeat Christians? And one of his main tools is, if you can get the bodily posture to not matter to the Christ follower, that's a win for us as demons. And it makes me think of Romans 12, right? Where Paul says, present your bodies as your living sacrifice, right? And Paul also talks about our bodies being the temple that God dwells in. What's the connection between bodily posture, and maybe that's hands open or hands up in worship, or even just a mental state walking into worship? How do I maintain that appropriate fear of God through my posture?
Yeah, there's so much profundity. That's a big word. There's a profound aspect to people that stand in worship with their arms at their side or slouched over in their chair or whatever. And I think that the volition, what is it, Matthew, who says, where your treasure is, your heart will be also. Basically, and I think the background to that is saying, you're not always going to want to do X, Y, and Z. You're not always going to understand X, Y, and Z. And when you don't, the natural assumption we have in our culture, which is highly individualistic, and we tell people, do what you want, look out for number one, you're the most important thing in the universe, is we end up doing only the things that we desire to do. And that's why I think Paul in Romans chapter 7 says, I will consistently find myself doing the stuff I don't want to do. I often refrain from doing the stuff that I do want to do. But he says, but I know the difference. And that's what scares me, Paul says. And it freaks me out is not that like a child I keep, walking into the fire and going, what is fire? He goes, I know it's fire and I keep doing it. And then I know what grace is and I avoid it. He said, that's what freaks me out. That's why he ends that passage with, who can rescue me from this body of death? And yet we found a comfort in just saying, I'm not a worshiper, or I'm not a singer, or I don't practice reverence. I'm not a feeler when it comes to worship. But so often the reason that is because what we say to ourselves when we enter worship is, what do I want to do right now? And so it's oftentimes like a child, we're motivated and we're stirred and we're steered by our emotions. What do I want to do right now? Right? It's like as a dad, if Piper in the middle of the night starts screaming and you just ask, what do I want to do right now? Your affections won't be stirred in that moment to probably help, but you get up and you do it. And then what you find as you do that, right, it's even more important. You go and pick her up, and then maybe she needs a diaper change or whatever. And then you find this deep intimacy with her because you found yourself doing even what you didn't want to do. And I think where some students especially get lost is the reason that intimacy escapes them, or the power of worship escapes them, or a fear of God escapes them, is they're so motivated by what they want to do that they don't ever do stuff that they don't want to do. So like for me growing up, I always thought the people who raised their hands in worship were very showy. But I realized it was easy for me just to say, you're showy people that raise your hands, because I knew that for me to raise my hands was a show of humiliation. It was a show of humility and saying, this is uncomfortable for me and I'm going to make your name great. And I'm going to raise you up and it's going to make me feel weird. So I knew that if I just made fun of other people for doing it, or just said, I'm not a hands raiser, then what I was doing is I would give myself permission to not practice that posture of worship. What I found now since then is in moments, particularly when my hands are up, it often doesn't mean that I'm really feeling it. It often means that I'm really not. It means that my brain is somewhere else, or that my focus is somewhere else. And when I can move to raise my hands, or in some moments even to bow my knee, or to express myself in some way physically, it shifts my emotions to a different place, rather than sitting there going, when I'm moved enough, I'll raise my hands, or when I'm moved enough, I'll bow the knee. When I'm moved enough, I'll X, Y, and Z. When I'm moved enough, I'll sing. Then we're saying my heart can guide me. And we know what scripture says about the heart, right? Jeremiah 17, verse 9, your heart is deceptively wicked above everything else. Who can tame it? Do not follow it. It's a bad counselor. It's a bad guide. It's a bad coach. It's a bad life consultant. But that's what we do. We worship going, heart, what do I want? What do you think? What do you feel? And then we let our body respond to that instead of letting our body lead the way. What we can control. I can control my arms going up. I can't control if I want my arms to go up. So I think that's what we fall victim to. We just say, well, what do I want? And we do that instead of saying, God, what pleases you? What will shift my emotion? And then do that instead. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely. And I really even just want to end right there, because I want that to sink in. What you said was so profound, of my connection with God and my relationship with God is directly tied to my willingness to do things I don't want to do.
Yeah.
Because I think that is such a huge piece of my own relationship with Jesus and our leaders' relationship with Jesus. And now for 9th and 10th graders to lean in, because I think so often we fall victim to, well, I don't feel close to God, or I don't feel God's presence, or I don't want to open up my Bible because I don't get anything out of it. And I don't want to worship because like when I worship, I don't feel a connection. It's our connection to God and the depth of relationship with him is directly correlated to my willingness to do things that are uncomfortable, right? That's the nature of surrender. I don't think anybody ever goes like, I feel like surrendering and doing things God's way 100% of the time. It's like, what other relationship is like that? No friendship is like that. Marriage is definitely like that. Parenting, perfect analogy, is definitely not like that, right? In my wealth of experience in the last 3 weeks, for sure, like love is directly correlated so often to, man, I'm going to make myself less and I'm going to become less important in this moment. And yet you're spot on. Like my my affections for Piper, even as a 3-week-old infant, are stirred when I'm doing things that I don't want to do. And I think that's so often with God. And that's not saying that we'll never want to worship or we'll never want to open up our Bible. I don't think the call of Christianity is this like want, have to do these things I don't want to do. Like we become Eeyore almost. I really think it is that life and life abundant. But to unlock the door to that life and life abundant, it requires surrender. And those are the moments where, for sure, hands go up in worship. I relate to that so much as somebody who, I'm not musically gifted. I don't have a great voice. Worship doesn't come natural to me. And yet, when I choose to lean in, especially when I don't feel like it, oftentimes those are the moments where I feel the surrender of I'm going to, almost like square my shoulders up. I'm going to raise my hands. I'm going to have this presence, like I want to understand that I'm in the presence of God, because I think about if anybody I respect, right? Whether it's, I love sports. And so I think about being in like the presence of like a Peyton Manning or a Michael Jordan or, a Lionel Messi. Like if I
Derek
was in
Carr.
their presence, I'm not a Derek Carr, if you will. If I'm in their presence, I'm not just going to be like slouched in my chair, like, sup, Derek, right? Like, and that's just like an athlete. And take whatever it is. Like if you're into politics, like be in the presence of the Queen of England or like whoever, right? Like a Donald Trump, a Joe Biden, like, regardless of what you think about them, like be in their presence for a second. Like you and I, unpopular opinion, not the biggest LeBron James fans. And I will sit on my couch all day long and go like, freaking LeBron, such a whiner. And yet if I'm being honest, if I was in the presence of LeBron, I'm probably not going to look at LeBron and go like, you're a whiner. Like I'm probably gonna be like, Mr. James, like very respectful, because I respect his position as
Yeah.
as like one of the greatest basketball players of all time, and artist, musician, whoever it would be. When we are in their presence, I'm going to act differently, and I wonder if that fails to translate when it comes to the God of the universe. Oftentimes, I think, man, if I just looked out on the 9-10 crowd or on an 11-12 crowd or on a Jordan crowd, and I wonder, like, would we act this way in the throne room of God, worshiping him? Like, wouldn't everybody's hands be up? Wouldn't everybody be on their knees? Wouldn't everybody be like, oh, that is the creator of the universe right there, rather than like hands at the side or slouched or kind of mumbling under my breath or on my phone or distracting the person next to me or whatever. Like, I just think that's a profound statement to say our connection to God is directly correlated to my willingness to go against my feelings. That's awesome. Dang, Chris, thanks so much, man. Thanks for hopping on this call with me. I appreciate your heart for worship so much, and just what we get to do with 9-10 and 11-12 and now with the Jordan. I know it's something that we're both passionate about, but love you to death, man. Thanks for loving 9-10 so well. And 9-10, we'll see you on Wednesday night.
Love you too, man. Thanks, guys.